Welcome back into another Vandy Sports podcast here on the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Billy Derrick, joined by Luke Wyatt today, back from a little hiatus. I think all of us have had a little summer hiatus, but we're back rocking and rolling. Fall camp starting next Wednesday, which is kind of unbelievable. So we're keeping the football talk rolling. But first, let's get to some of our proud sponsors. First, Anchor Impact, the Wash House. Log on to washhouseclean.com. Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, mpmci.com, Sutherland and Belk, sbinjurylaw.com, and Maynard Nexon Government Contracts Group, maynardnexon.com. Big thanks to all of our sponsors who make this podcast and this entire site possible for Vanderbilt fans. Speaking of Vanderbilt, Luke, there hasn't been a ton going on, obviously, with you've got basketball workouts and practices and football workouts. Baseball, you've got camps and all these recruiting camps going on, changes with baseball, but I do want to focus on football today. And if you've got anything on basketball and baseball, of course, we can bring that into this as well. But with you kind of being out of pocket here the last month or two or so, what have you gathered from summer workouts? Obviously, the I guess they call them mid-year enrollees have arrived, whether it's Diego Pavia or whoever. They had a lot of them. So that you had some late new faces come in for football. What have you gathered? What are you hearing? And how are you feeling now that, fall camp is less than a week away right now?
Well, Billy, good to be back, first of all. And I've been watching you guys on your podcast from afar. A couple of new members have joined us, and you guys doing a fantastic job with that. As far as football goes, I have had a couple of conversations with Clark. He's obviously excited. I tell you, he's like a kid in a candy store now that he's got his defense that's his. It's funny. I guess it was his first year here, and he was just, drinking from a fire hose, so to speak. And I told him, I said, you realize that year 3 is the toughest one. And he just laughed and he said, Luke, let me get through year 1 first. Sure, I said, but I just want to let you know what's down the road. So buckle up your pants real tight because you got a lot of work to do. So we started talking about that, and we had a conversation about Coach Woodenhofer. And when Woody was here, he did it. He was the head coach, but he also ran the defense for a while. And then he hired someone else. And the defense was nationally ranked. Obviously, Woody had a sense for what was going on most offenses. So Clark is in that position now to take this team forward, along with the incredible having Jerry Keel and Tim Beck. I think people are going to see a totally different Vanderbilt football that they haven't seen in a long time. And I compare this, and I'm not saying they're going to win 8 games, obviously, but I compare this to Watson Brown's offenses back in the 80s at Vanderbilt. And if our defense can play anywhere near, let's say, a touchdown better than last year, Billy, we have a chance to be in every game. Not saying we're going to win 6. I think we can win somewhere between 4 and 6. But that opener, and you always have to put so much weight on an opener with a Vanderbilt team, or it seems like that. That game against Virginia Tech is going to tell us a whole lot. It's going to tell us, first of all, how quickly they have taken on this new offense, which I think is going to be Diego Pavia and Nate Johnson's baby. I think Diego, with the experience and know-how of what they expect, has a leg up. But I think you'll see both of those guys play. And, there's some weapons at tight end that you're going to see utilized that we haven't seen used here in many, many years. So I'm looking forward to it. And I'd like to get your feeling on it, too, from what you
Yeah, well, media days obviously was last week. You can't always take too much from it, but I don't think it was a bad thing that we didn't come away from media days saying, wow, that, Clark said this or Langston said this. It was more of business as usual, as opposed to maybe last year where they did have a ton of confidence. You were coming off a 5-7 year, and you had your quarterback in AJ Swan, and you also had some younger guys that were coming up, and you felt really good. This year it's like, no, we got to get back to proving ourselves And, we were humbled this past season. And you also heard from Clark some interesting comments, whether it was on Radio Row or on the main podium, accepting the faults of whether it's him, other staff members, whoever it was within this process of falling behind in NIL, in the transfer portal, not being active enough in that space, and he admitted to that. And I think that's, if you're a fan, that's exactly what you want. Now, are the fixes going to be immediate fixes or immediate changes in the win column? Who knows? But Luke, to me, it says a lot that really every change that I think most fans wanted happened. And that's all you can ask for, especially at a school like Vanderbilt in today's day and age, where, I mean, you fall behind 1 year. It might take 2 years to come back, and it's almost what happened. Vanderbilt probably fell behind 2, maybe even 3, and they're kind of playing catch up right now. But I just thought it was really interesting how Clark did admit to some of the early faults, and now that they're trying to, get back above water, it's hard, and he admitted that as well. And so I just think, Luke, it's so big, and we've talked about this with Chris, that we know the challenges, but if you're not willing to put the work in and make those changes to get up there, to get up above water in the SEC, then you never have any hope. Now, at least at this point, you've got those changes, and there is a little bit of hope.
Yeah, we talk about the situation with NIL and the transfer portal, and yes, Vanderbilt, along with a lot of other private schools and some state schools, were late to the party. Now, you can blame the coach, and obviously there's a blame to go around with administration, all the way up to the chancellor, to the athletic director, to the coaches. I think that Vanderbilt, including Coach Corbin, felt like, gosh, we've got a model that's worked. Now they've moved the goalpost. Mm-hmm. Not that we're winning in football. I don't mean that at all, but especially from Tim's standpoint, my model is player development. Get them in here. We have a brand in Vanderbilt, the Vandy Boys baseball. And then all of a sudden now he's got to pay guys to come play because everybody else is. And that's a tough thing unless you're a state school with a ton of money like a A&M or an Alabama or whatever it may be. It's not an easy transition. And you've got to figure it out. And, of course, Vanderbilt, along with a Wake Forest and a Duke and places like that, they also have to have that academic piece involved. And that makes it a tougher deal. I thought that by now things would have leveled off, but it's not. It hasn't. And, I saw this morning where baseball scholarships are now at 34. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that means roster size is 34 or if you can still have 40. I don't know, Billy, you may know that. But there's just so many changes that come up on you quickly. And, yes, Vanderbilt failed in identifying them at a quick pace.
Let's get to more of the football specific talk here. No quarterbacks were at SEC Media Days, and last year, no quarterbacks at SEC Media Days. And we've talked a lot last year about the quarterback messaging, right? You almost didn't know, especially late in the year, was it going to be Ken Seals? Was A.J. Swan healthy? How much playing time is Walter Taylor going to get? This year, obviously, that shouldn't happen, right? Drama like that probably shouldn't happen. Luke, you've got Diego Pavia coming in from New Mexico State. And I talked about this in the last podcast with Will, our new contributor. And I brought up the fact that, Pavia in this offense, he's basically going to be running the New Mexico State offense. I mean, you've got Tim Beck coming in as the offensive coordinator. You've got Eli Stowers, like you talked about. You hinted at the tight ends earlier as a guy that they used in Wildcat a lot in the red zone last year. But you've also got Nate Johnson, an actual quarterback and when you get in the red zone, you've got him at the Wildcat. I'm sure we'll be seeing a little bit of both Pavia and Johnson back there. There's a lot you can do, Luke, and I'm sure there's a lot we still have to figure out. That's why I am excited for fall camp to see, okay, what's this offense trying to do, and get to talk to Tim Beck and say, obviously it's, we still got about a month before the season, but what's going to be the focus here? How are you guys planning to attack these defenses, especially when you get into SEC play? You've got athletic edge rushers. You got big linebacker. I mean, these defenses can be freakish now. So that's what I'm also looking at, Luke. And I'm interested to get your take on it. What will this offense look like? And we may not even know it yet, but with Pavia and then also Nate Johnson, those are two runners that are pretty dynamic when used the right way.
Yeah, I agree. I brought it up a little bit just a minute ago, and this is a little bit before your time, but you can still go back. There's stuff on YouTube. Go watch the 82 Vanderbilt Tennessee football game. You can see it on YouTube. We had a quarterback named, we've all heard of, named Whit Taylor, and we had we ran very similar to what you're going to see run this year. Norman Jordan was not recruited by anyone. He was not an SEC athlete. Keith Edwards was a, quote, fullback who caught more passes than anybody in the SEC that year. We moved guys around to fit what they could do, and it was a very effective offense, one of the best in the country. Now, making that happen, you have to have your 11 best football players on the field, whether that be 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends. If that's what's our best option, then that's what you'll see. I think you'll see Coach Beck and Coach Kill just work with whatever they're giving us. We're going to take it. It may not be pretty. It may not be bombs from 60 yards. It's going to be death by 1,000 cuts and being smarter than the team that's across from you. And that's not going to work every time when you line up against a Texas or an Alabama and they've got all those great athletes. A lot of times their linebackers are as fast as your running backs are faster. So you have to kind of trick them, so to speak. Now, that's not going to work every game, but most games, if you're clicking right, that's what it's going to look like. And again, I want to go back to the tight ends. I think that's the most talented position on this team. I think you've got some depth, and I include Stowers in that. But there's going to be, last year you had Shepard, who may have been a problem in the locker room and that type of thing. And then you had the one guy in the portal that we lost that was a problem in London Humphreys. So I'm excited in the fact that all the other guys are back. Yeah, London was a loss. There's no doubt about it. But offensively right now, it's going to look pretty. It's going to be a fun offense to watch, which last year wasn't. And one more thing about the offense last year. We all thought A.J. Swan was the man. When we go into camp, everyone think, well, okay, we got a great quarterback. All we got to do is protect him. Well, the turnovers. Remember the turnovers early on? You can't win it. It doesn't matter what your offensive game plan is. If you're turning the football over and giving the other team the ball or the plus 50, you're not going to win any games no matter who you are, especially if you're Vanderbilt. So I think that's where things just unraveled for us last year, and the scheme wasn't great. And then we didn't have any answers because Mike Wright was gone. And as you remember, the year before, the 2 SEC games we won was with a mobile quarterback in Mike Wright.
Let's go defense here, Luke. I know you hinted at it at the beginning, Clark Lea taking over, and he does seem like a kid in a candy shop. And, asking about how much fun you have, he said, man, I'm having so much fun doing this right now. And even you talk to the players, whether it's Langston Patterson, CJ Taylor, some of the younger guys, they just immediately start smiling whenever they're asked about, Clark taking over the defense. So how much of an impact will that make, and how different will it look from last year? I'm not talking results. I'm not asking you to say, well, they'll cut down their points per game by 5, but just, stylistically. And that's the other funny part of this. Anytime during the spring, we would kind of hint at a scheme question at, is this scheme going to be different than last year? Very tight-lipped, which tells me it'll be a little bit different, obviously. And it probably needs to be a little bit different, in all honesty. But Luke, I just wonder, stylistically, organization-wise, game management-wise, defensively, how different do you see this defense just looking aesthetically this year as opposed to last year?
Well, I would encourage the fans to just go watch Notre Dame's defense. Now, obviously, Notre Dame had better athletes than we do at this moment. But if you want to see what Clark does, Clark is a math guy. He's a numbers guy. He understands hat on a hat. Sometimes, if that's what the offense is trying to do to you, and you have to win your one-on-one battles. But he understands too, and if you listen on media day, Langston Patterson alluded to this when he talked about 50% being players, 50% being scheme. That's what it is. You know, when you've got C.J. Taylor, Langston Patterson, the kid from the kid from TCU.
Brandon Fontenette.
Okay, that's a middle of your defense, really. It's almost like in baseball. You want to be strong up the middle. In football, you got to be strong up the middle. And as long as we get average to above average play from our defensive line, the middle of our defense can carry this team. I know we got a couple of injuries or a couple of guys possibly out in the secondary already, but they're still better off than they were last year. I just feel like you're going to see a defense that will play to its strengths, be put in a position to make plays, whereas last year there was a whole lot of guessing going on. You could see it, and then the confidence just waned every weekend. You know, you get guys, if you remember, Billy, there was a lot of games where we had teams third long and couldn't get off the field because two things, lack of pass rush and the corners, secondary, let's just say the entire secondary, was inept. It just was. By scheme, by talent, by confidence, however you want to put it. You won't see that this year. Now, there's going to be some games where we'll give up a lot of points because the opponents are so good. But you're going to really enjoy what Clark puts out there and the scheme and the aggressiveness that he plays with and the smarts that this team will play with.
Last episode, Will and I talked about the coaching changes and the impact that some of these coaches can have. And you know, we forget about the new running backs coach is coming over from New Mexico State. You know, you've got an offensive line assistant that came in, Steve Gregory, who's been in the NFL, is going to be kind of an associate defensive coordinator there alongside Clark Lea. So a lot of different changes, but you talked about it at the beginning, Jerry Kill. And I brought this up to Will. I said, maybe not directly on game days. I mean, I'm sure he'll have an impact on game days, but I just think like right now, fall camp leading up to a season, he can have a really big impact. And even in the weeks leading up to games in preparation. And I just think one-on-one with players, I just feel like Jerry Kill is really good. And I'm really interested to see how involved is he on the sidelines on game days? Is he up in the booth? I would imagine Jerry Kill's a guy that you probably want on the sidelines down there, and how involved with the offensive, calls and game management type stuff. Like, how do you envision him being involved on game days directly, and even some of the other things? Like, what is Jerry Kill? And maybe we can't directly answer this, but I'm just interested. What does Jerry Kill's day-to-day look like with Vanderbilt football, and then specifically on game days?
Well, I think his day-to-day is obviously what he was hired for in the first place before they changed the rule where he could actually coach. Mm-hmm. That's to be an advisor and a consultant. In other words, you get off the practice field. All right, Jerry, let's watch practice. And he would watch it, and he would make his notes and say, here's what we got to do. No, this is not going to work. This is lined up wrong, this type of thing, making corrections, so to speak. Now that he can coach, that's a blessing for Vanderbilt. Wow, is that a blessing? So now what Jerry on game day, I think, and I agree with you, I think he'll be on the field. There's a chance he'll be in the press box early on in the season because he can see everything and see how it looks from up there, maybe have a good feel. But I think at some point he's going to be on the field for sure. Jerry and Tim are like this. It's like two minds. They're thinking alike. So that's huge. And I want to say this: we got older as a coaching staff, and that was important. Clark had one of the youngest staffs in the country. Not knocking that, but there's nothing like experience. And Jerry Kill has won everywhere he's been. And if you look at Tim Beck going back to Pittsburgh State in Kansas, mm-hmm. wins everywhere he goes. And I did some digging back when this first happened. I can't find anybody saying anything bad about Tim Beck or anything negative about Tim Beck. Well, he doesn't do this or he doesn't do that or he hasn't adjusted to this. So, I just think we actually got lucky. When New Mexico State beat Auburn, that's what got Clark's attention to make New Mexico State. If that game doesn't happen, or if New Mexico State plays poorly that day and Auburn beats them, I don't know that we're sitting where we are right now. And so I think this is fate, and I think it's going to help us a ton. Again, I'm not saying we're going to win 8 games. I'm just saying we're going to have a chance to win a lot more games than what we've had in the past.
We've talked about Robert Steiner a lot, him coming in and putting his handprints on the way this team trains and really leading the way on that. And that's one of the many things they've changed that you can't undersell, right? The change in the strength and conditioning program, the soft tissue injuries. I mean, if Clark has to say soft tissue injuries are an issue, I think he might have an aneurysm again this year. That was not fun for him, and that really cost them that entire season, really, Luke. So early on, we were really starting to feel the benefits of Robert Steiner and on a lot of these players. And I bring that into fall camp. What are you most looking forward to? Whether it's a certain player, how much bigger has this guy gotten? What's this skill set from this freshman or this transfer? What are you most looking forward to in fall camp? Because for me, and I talked about this last episode, is just seeing how much bigger certain guys are, and how healthy are they? Because last year a lot of times you saw way too many guys sitting on the side, not practicing. They got to practice, right? You got to stay healthy, and I think that was the biggest reason for that change.
Well, Billy, I even noticed it. You may remember, it's been a long time ago, but I mentioned in a podcast, I only went to 2 spring practices, but just seeing guys like, for instance, Quincy Skinner's arms and just some other guys, how much thicker they look, how much more. And what does that do? If you look in the mirror, now I'm way past that. You're not, Billy. You can still look. But if you look in the mirror and you see yourself getting bigger and stronger and more defined, what does that do? It gives you confidence. And a little thing called confidence goes a long way. And these kids are lacking in that. I don't think they had a belief in what they were doing in the weight room. They were being good soldiers and doing what they're supposed to do in the weight room, but it wasn't working, obviously. And again, you have to give Clark credit for recognizing that. So many coaches stick with something too long, and he didn't. And I wish Coach Horrigan the best, but it wasn't working for what Vanderbilt needs. That may work in the USFL or whatever it is when you've already got a body that's ready to go, but not at Vanderbilt. You got to develop those bodies, and you're going to see when you get out here in the fall, I think you're going to see the offensive line is going to look different. Obviously, there's 4 new guys at least, maybe more, that will play a lot, and maybe even most of them will start because this offense is predicated just like any offense up front of what you do. And it doesn't mean that we got to move them out and, put a hat on a hat and move everybody one-on-one. It means you got to have smart guys who are in shape, ready to go, and be able to click off plays one right after the other, because I think you're going to see a really big difference in the conditioning of this football team.
I got one more before we wrap it up. And, again, my apologies. Chris is actually not feeling well, so he was unable to join today. Hopefully we'll get him back next week. So we weren't able to get a mailbag up. We'll hopefully get that mailbag back up next week, and maybe try to get one after that first fall camp practice, and maybe even give a little bit of intel. But Luke, to wrap it up, out of the transfers, who are you most excited to see, and who do you think can really make an impact? I look defensively, whether it's Randon Fontenette, whether it's Corday Sidnor, but I think the players that must make an impact, I think we know kind of what we're getting defensively with those 2 guys. And there's other transfers out there, but offensively, I think you need something from Darian Wiley. The kid, I think, came from Nevada at receiver. Obviously, Eli Stowers. I think you need more from the offensive transfers, because with Clark defensively, I've told people this, I'm not too worried about the defense. Now, they're going to give up some points, but they're also going to take away some points with some turnover. I think they're going to force some turnovers this year. Now, whether they're impactful in the game or not, we'll see. But who are you most looking forward to seeing transfer-wise that you think can and should really make an impact this year?
Well, I think the corner from Wyoming, it's imperative that he plays well and plays a lot. He played well in their bowl game last year, and I watched a little film on him. He played in the bowl, I think, because a kid had opted out of the bowl, and he really showed out. Great athlete, 6'3". I think he's going to have to play a lot. I think we got to have to be able to roll in 4 corners that can play. That's important. Another guy that you didn't mention who I think is going to play and have an impact is Zaylen Wood, the transfer from MTSU. Big, strong kid, looks tough. I'll just, again, let's go back to the weight room thing for a second. And this ain't a transfer, but Demarion Thomas and Issa, those guys, their bodies are changing. I saw them on their little scooters, and they're about to smash the scooters to the ground. So, I mean, that type of thing, that it's not necessarily the transfers themselves. It's the whole of what we do on defense and offense that's going to make us a lot better. And obviously the transfers help just from the depth piece. We now have guys who played last year that won't start, but will still have to play in games. But when they know they're not going to have to be out there for all 70 plays, they can go out there and bust their butt for the time they're in there. I think you're going to see a whole lot of more numbers play in games now. I think because especially on the defensive side of the ball, because I know how Clark is. If you're not going 110 when you're out there, your butt's coming to the sideline. So that has to happen. And I'm excited about the transfers just from the standpoint it helps so much with the depth.
Yeah. Yeah. And you just haven't seen that. You haven't seen this many transfers come in at Vanderbilt. And that's why it's definitely gonna be something to get used to. So this is when you start studying the roster a little bit. A lot of the numbers are changing as well. And it's a different roster. I mean, it started, Luke, a week or two after the season last year. You know, he kind of started tracking who's leaving, who's coming in. Obviously, some guys were more disappointing than others, but at the end of the day, the changes were made, and we'll see what happens. Because right now, I mean, with fall camp on the horizon next week, you got the door jam coming up. I think August 24th will be a Saturday, and then this season kicks off that next Saturday, August 31st, 11 a.m. against Virginia Tech. So, Luke, any parting thoughts? I know we wish we could have had Chris on here, but just glad football's back.
Yeah, me too. One thing I did want to mention about the portal, and I'll ask you this question as we end. I feel like, you know, everybody talks about, well, so-and-so did great in the portal, so-and-so did poorly in the portal. I feel like you look at it this way. What did you lose in the portal, and what did you gain? And I feel like we have an A in that category. Yes, we lost London Humphrey. But as far as our losses in the portal compared to what we brought in to help us with our depth and help us with some guys at positions of need, I think we won the portal battle for Vanderbilt.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, and it felt strategic too. The changes, the players that you were bringing in weren't just, oh, let's bring this guy in here. Let's bring, you know, a couple of corners in here. Well, no, you made the changes and you were more strategic about it than ever before. So anyway, that'll wrap it up today. Again, wish we could have had a mailbag, but we will be back at it next week. I'm sure it'll be me, Chris, and Luke right after that first fall camp practice next Wednesday. So stay tuned for that. Got a lot of football stuff coming. I'm sure we'll keep talking a little bit of basketball and baseball, especially basketball as we get closer, but focused and lasered in on football right now. For Luke Wyatt, I'm Billy Derrick. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Vandy Sports Podcast.